A very good and early morning to those joining us from the eastern seaboard of the Americas, including Central and Latin America. Good morning to those from the United Kingdom, Eastern and Western Europe, Africa and the Middle East. Good afternoon to those from China, India and Southeast Asia. And good evening to those from Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific. And a very late good evening yesterday, or very, very early morning today, to those from the western side of Americas. Welcome to PCST2020+1's conference's first session, no matter where you are based. I am coming to you from the beautiful North Stradbroke Island, or Minjerribah, off the coast of Brisbane in Australia. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the First Nation owners of these lands of Minjerribah, the Quandamooka peoples. I would like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. This has always been a place of learning, research, teaching, art and culture. And it is this very mix between science, arts, culture and learning that feature in our visual presentations today. Through this mix, the theme of transformation of art working with science to create positive changes is happening. Let me explain the format of today's session. Each speaker has a maximum of 3 minutes to talk about their visuals. I will mute them after 3 minutes. At the end of all the talks, we will have a discussion lasting about 20 minutes. There's a Q&A function at the bottom of this webinar screen. Please feel free to use this function to ask questions and to like others' questions. We'll use the most popular questions to focus on during our discussion. All of the visuals today can be accessed through the conference platform, and you can ask questions of speakers there and continue the dialogue on throughout the conference and for a month beyond the conference. At the end of today's session, we'll ask you to choose your favourite visual presentation from today. So please stay for this poll. The 10 most popular speakers overall will get to speak again on May 26, where there'll be a popular and judges voting and prizes awarded. But let's start this first session. Art takes many forms, and our first speaker talks about installation art. I would like to welcome Jo Bailey, who is from Massey University, the Centre for Science and Society in New Zealand, who is going to be talking about taking a load off our minds through airing our dirty laundry, an installation for participation and dialogue. Thank you very much, Jo.
Thanks, Jenny. I'll just share my screen. So I'm in New Zealand, so it's night time for me. So if I start trucking into a glass of wine, don't judge me. All right. Hang on a second.
Kia ora. I'm Jo Bailey, a PhD student at the Centre for Science and Society at Victoria University in Wellington, here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm also a designer and a design academic based at the Wellington School of Design, part of Massey University. I'm delighted to kick off this art science panel by admitting to being something of a fraud. I'm definitely a designer, not an artist, so please don't expect to see things of beauty in my work. It's much more about using design methods and design processes, and the things you'll see are deliberately low fidelity and low tech. Design, like art, has many manifestations, and this diagram shows a spectrum of approaches from the explanatory, usually commercially focused end fixated on making or selling products, through more experience-orientated modes like service design and participatory design, to a more speculative end of the spectrum, where design processes and outputs can be used to probe, ask questions, or proffer future scenarios. As a graphic designer by training, I'm used to operating at the explanatory end, but I've been blurring the boundaries by using approaches across the spectrum in my work. I'm interested in the intersection of science communication theory and scientists who communicate or are thinking about communicating with different publics, facilitating connection between the two and using design to think about doing public engagement in a reflexive and human-centered way. I have here a short video about a project called A Load Off Your Mind, which is part of my PhD research. It's a cardboard laundromat that doubles as a third space in which to air the dirty laundry of science culture. A Load Off Your Mind has been an installation at 3 conferences and a gallery, and has since evolved into a residential workshop experience, and thanks to COVID has also been run as a socially distanced version. Thanks for being here, and I look forward to your questions at the end.
That's me.
I'm muted. Thank you very much, Jo. That was really interesting. I'll move to our next speaker. Just remove the spotlight. Our next speaker I'd like to introduce is Mandy Bamford. She's from Bamford Consulting Ecologists in Australia, and she's talking about Time for a New Audience, Boorna Waanginy, case study of art, science and culture phenomenon. And I apologise if I've done that wrong there, but welcome to this session, Mandy.
Thanks very much, Jenny. Yes, Boorna Waanginy is the Noongar word, so the southwestern Australian Aboriginal word, which means the trees speak. And it's great to be talking about art and science, which is just such a powerful way to communicate our messages. And I want you to imagine you're walking through an avenue of trees. It's dark. You can smell the smells of eucalypt. You can hear the sounds of birds calling and frogs calling. And then you'll see a flock of birds fly over and maybe a lizard climb up the trunk of a tree next to you. But you're not alone. There's a group of people around you. In fact, there's thousands of people around you. And you listen to the stories of Noongar elders talking about the importance of our biodiversity and the way that the 6 seasons cycle through. This is a really, really powerful project that I worked on. I was very privileged to work with some amazing artists, very environmentally aware artists, some incredible Noongar elders and eminent scientists. And it was designed as the opening event for Perth Festival, a free event open to everybody. And it ran through Kings Park. It was a 1.5 kilometre walk through Kings Park. It ran first in 2017 and 110,000 people came. It was remounted and developed further and remounted and shown in 2019, and over 200,000 people saw the show over 4 nights. So I suppose the first thing was we grabbed a big audience because people came for a beautiful light show, and we hit them with the extinction crisis and then some messages of hope at the end, which thankfully people loved. And you'll see by the statistics on the slide, actually people loved the event, and some people came back and they told their friends. So it was a really powerful way to get that message across. And I think that was largely because of the skill of the artists. And I would encourage you all to use art to communicate messages whenever you can, and talk to completely different groups, because that's the way we're going to get our message to the audience who needs to hear it. There's videos on, links to the videos on the slide as well. So there's lots of ways you can see the actual show. Thanks, that's me.
Well, thank you very much. And you finished even earlier than we anticipated. So well done.
Oh, I had to, oh, my clock said I had to stop. Well, it was lovely to talk to you all anyway.
No problems. Thank you very much. We're now going across to the Netherlands, and I'd like to welcome Francien Bossem, who's from the Centrum Wiskunde and Informatica in the Netherlands. And she's going to talk about science communication in an interdisciplinary research project.
I don't like that word either.
The interplay between scientists and historians, conservators and the general public. Thank you so much, Francien.
Thank you, Jenny. Actually, I'm going to cheat and just say Center for Mathematics and Computer Science to save the trouble.
Excellent.
But you actually pronounced it really well. Let me share the screen. Tell me if you can see it now. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. The wooden sculpture in the green oval is surrounded by mystery. How old is this wooden sculpture? And where and by whom was it made? These are typical questions asked by conservators of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam about objects in their collection. In the Impact for Art project, we aim to answer these questions using CT scanning and imaging science in a collaboration between the museum and the Center for Mathematics and Computer Science, both located in Amsterdam. My name is Francien Bossem, and I am one of the researchers in the Impact for Art project. I am a mathematician, and I'm concerned with developing methods and algorithms for the CT scanning of cultural heritage. Similar to medical imaging, where a crack in a human bone can be revealed by an X-ray, we use X-rays to peek into art objects. In the case of the sculpture, X-ray imaging reveals the tree rings as is shown in the red oval, where we see a single radiograph on the left and a slice through the reconstructed CT volume, where these tree rings are very well visible. The tree rings can be used to answer questions such as the date the object was manufactured and where it came from. In this interdisciplinary project, we aim to develop new techniques and algorithms tailored to the specific requirements for CT scanning art objects. Researchers from different backgrounds come together, art historians, conservators, and imaging scientists. And the research goals are therefore twofold: methodological, developing new techniques and algorithms, and object-based, using these images to answer art historical questions or to determine the conservation state of the object. In such an interdisciplinary project, clear communication is challenged due to the different backgrounds, jargon, and different interests. To maximize knowledge gain for both research aims, close collaboration between experts is essential. Scans are therefore always performed with both the object expert and the imaging expert present, and the input from the object expert is leading and guiding the scanning process. It is important to discuss details and explain respective research methods and goals to each other. Each has their own specific specialization. Being open and curious about each other topics is therefore key. A third interest group, although not directly involved in the research process, is the museum public. Art objects are made for aesthetic purposes and often have an interesting background story. These stories and the visually pleasing objects appeal to a very wide public. Currently, we use visualizations such as shown for the sculpture here in the blue oval, blog posts and TV broadcasts to communicate our findings to a broad audience. In the future, we hope to integrate research and background stories in an exhibition, making technical research more tangible by using the attraction of art. You are muted, Jenny.
Yes, thank you very much, Francine. If you could stop sharing, that would be great. Well done, and well done in keeping on time as well. I would like to invite our next speaker, who's going to be Autumn Brown from Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, to talk about her talk, which is Guides at the Horizon, Art and Science Learning Spaces. And I will share a screen for her.
Thank you so much.
There you go. Thank you, Autumn.
That's lovely, thank you. So I'm going to quickly touch on three things. First, kind of the role of science communicator, also art science spaces as both methodology and context, and then looking at when we are in these super transdisciplinary spaces where we are mixing art, science, design, engineering, how we are going to evaluate these spaces. Are there evaluation methodologies that are particularly appropriate when we're looking at so many different kinds of literacies and learnings? So firstly, very, very quick definition of art science. Art science embraces connections, rejects disciplinary distinctions, and utilizes the transdisciplinary elements of exploration and invention as a bridge for the arts and sciences to create new forms of meaning. This is essentially saying that we aren't really paying any attention to disciplinary boundaries. We're asking questions through multiple means and we're trying to answer them through multiple means. So within this space, who should a science communicator actually be? When we think about communication, it means not just to disseminate, but to actually share and exchange information. And I think as a science communicator, this is something that easily gets forgotten, that part of our job is to listen and to be there to facilitate dialogue, not just to come and speak and share. I think one of our superpowers, and something that we really need to think about more often, is the ways in which we can make connections, not only between disciplines, but between the academy, and wider communities. I think perhaps our greatest power as science communicators is bringing people to the table. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Jenny, I'm mindful of time.
Oops. Yeah.
No worries. Right, so as a case study and example, part of my thesis is looking at a nationally touring exhibition called Plastic, which looks at patterns of consumption, consumerism, capitalism, and environmental science, and critically the kind of impacts that plastics and microplastics have both on the environment and our bodies from a kind of ecological perspective. What's interesting about this is that all of the pieces that are included in the exhibition are part of an open call. And the open call isn't just to artists, designers, and those sort of creative folks, but also to scientists, engineers, and other creatives. And so you have real, and doctors, and so you have real experiments going on right next to art pieces and pieces that are somewhere in between, trying to solve real problems related to plastics and the proliferation of plastics, particularly, like I said, in our bodies and in the oceans. The piece in the upper right-hand corner of that is called The New Age of Trichology, and is actually a fishing net made out of human hair, which was created by an artist, but has gotten some real attention from policymakers, fishers, and folks who are marine scientists. So already you're starting to see this kind of engaging and exciting collaborations happening. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Thanks. Finally, so looking at the kind of evaluation methodology, what I've been utilizing is creating a framework and conceptual framework around zines, and being able to analyze the reflective power of zines to capture different literacies, to capture different kind of reflections on learning once people experience this kind of setting, like an art science exhibition, where they're able to actually contribute work to the exhibition that stays with it and become a part of that experience. I won't go into the details of the framework now, but we do have a paper that's going to be published really soon. But as zine creators, the medium is positioning learners not only as consumers of information, but as creators, as critics, and crucially experts in their own experience and knowledge communities. We're giving them the space to critically contribute to the exhibition and to the learning experience. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Autumn. Moving, I think it's not so east to the University of Aberdeen, I'd like to welcome Stefanie Doebl, who's from the University of Aberdeen, and she's going to be talking about transforming healthcare now, one doodle at a time. And yes, it is still about art. So thank you very much, Stefanie.
Great. Can you see the image?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. It's great to listen to all you others and be part of this session. So I tell you a bit about this image. So research stories can really enable change and inspire people. And that's what I really would like to do with my art and science intersection. But I have to ask myself how I can tell such a story in an engaging way when there's lots of different kind of data I have from my PhD. So my PhD is about improving healthcare delivery for fibromyalgia, which is a long-term pain condition, and I do that by exploring people's journeys through the entire healthcare system and their care experiences. And I have quite some different kind of data from surveys, reviews, as well as interviews. So an opportunity really came up to think about such a research story when the University of Aberdeen offered to participate in a competition which is called Images of Research. And the challenge thereby is for doctoral students to create one single image and to use maximum 100 words to explain what your research is about. And that is the image you can see is my submission of the single image. And there's also a creative text accompanying that image, but I won't show it today, but you can have a look at the platform. And I was inspired taking this kind of approach when I saw a movie poster actually where there was an original photograph with somebody with these kind of doodles around him. And I thought this is a really good opportunity to use all my kind of different data to tell that kind of research story. And what you see there is an original photograph I took with 40 doodles, which I decided to use out of, I think, 17 I had done, and placed it in a way so it can tell a story from left to right, where really it starts with the symptoms, the maze going through the diagnosis, but also then the treatments, and then have an opening door with being listened, understand, and getting understanding from researchers to impact, hopefully, for example, policy. So that was quite well received. I won the competition, which was quite nice. But what was actually more exciting was getting all this positive feedback from people who actually live with fibromyalgia, but other researchers as well. And for me, it's really using creative approaches to engage with people and hopefully then create impact with one doodle by a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was almost exactly on time. Well done. I would like to come back to Australia now and welcome Alice Motion from the University of Sydney, who's going to be talking about the Nano lens, art, science, and nature. Thank you very much, Alice.
Thank you, Jenny. So yeah, the Nano Lens project was conceptualized as a collaboration between two people called Chiara, one who is a chemist and one who is an art historian, and they invited me along for the ride. Chiara Nito, in her chemistry setting, explores surfaces and tries to recreate or emulate some of the properties of natural surfaces to give really cool properties, like paints that can repel water, ways of capturing water, ways of helping paints to be less subject to corrosion, and all sorts of cool and marvelous applications. And in order to do this, Chiara and her team have to look very closely. And the Nano lens brought together this idea of the way that artists and scientists both explore the world by looking really closely. So the first thing we have a look at here is we've tried to sort of juxtapose the idea of how a scientist looks. Here's Anthony Katselis collecting some samples with permission and looking at them through a microscope here at the university and measuring what's called a contact angle, which I'll explain a little bit later. And to have a look at the way that artists look. And here we have an example of a fabulous Australian artist, Margaret Preston, whose artwork featured on the front slide of this talk. And Margaret Preston said in an interview in 1945 that when she's painting flowers, she pulls one of its kind to pieces. I will know exactly how it's formed. When I've done this, I draw from another. I do this with all of my flowers, which struck us as a little bit quite similar to the way that scientists look more closely and to understand texture and to understand function. And so we began to explore some of the plants that Margaret Preston had painted in her artwork with the public, and to encourage them to look closely, both as a scientist and as an artist at the same time. And we did this through a series of events as part of National Science Week here in Sydney, Australia. But we also created some images at the university that we could bring to the event, because the microscopes we could carry with us aren't quite as sophisticated as the ones we have at the university. So here is some false color imaging on some microscopy of these Banksia leaves that are shown here. And they almost look like the surface of another planet when we look up close, or we look at the flowers more closely, and we brought these with us. And then we invited young people and their families and their friends to look more closely at some specimens that we had in the Royal Botanic Garden, again with permission, and then invited them to create some artwork, some that were more suitable for people who didn't want to draw, or we created these rubber stamps that mimic the properties of some of the images that we saw on the light microscopes, and asked and invited people to join in producing some artworks. Some other people worked with artists in residence to draw or to paint what they'd seen under the microscope, or what they saw when they were looking at the plants in front of them. And we're bringing together some of this research and some of these observations into what we hope to launch as a citizen science project, where using just water, your mobile phone, and some software, you can begin to measure what's called the contact angle of the droplets of water on different surfaces. And this gives an index of a surface's hydrophobicity or hydrophilicity. And these properties are the things that scientists like Chiara are trying to look for when they develop new materials. So we hope to be able to tell you more about that soon.
Thank you very much, Alice. If you could stop sharing your screen, we'll move to another part of the Southern Hemisphere, but down across the ocean to South Africa, and Joanne Riley, who is from the South African Agency for Science and Technology Advancement, who's going to be talking about a walk through time, South African Science Lens competition. So welcome, Joanne.
Thank you. Yes, good morning from South Africa and happy Freedom Day to any fellow South Africans online. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the South African Science Lens exhibition that we put together for the National Arts Festival in 2018. So the competition itself has been running since 2002, and it aims to encourage scientists to share their world and their work through photography, but also encourages all of us to see science and appreciate science in our everyday lives. So this exhibit was the first time that we had taken the photos into an art space. So previously they'd been used to display at science centers, published in popular science magazines. But it was the first time we were venturing into an art space, and we learned a lot about the nature of the festival, the nature of the visitors and the audience at the festival. So at the time, the exhibition was celebrating 15 years of the competition, or 10 rounds of the competition. So we had amassed quite a collection of photos, and we grouped these into two main themes. The first was the unfamiliar familiar, which was showing kind of everyday things in an unfamiliar way, giving a new perspective to everyday things. So an example here is a highly magnified rose petal, where one can even see the microbes among the folds in the petal. And then our second main theme was called Seeing the Unseen, which showed how science, scientific investigation, scientific tools and instruments have allowed us to discover and learn things beyond what we can see with the naked eye, and really highlighted some of the technology in science, such as the electron microscope, fluorescent staining, and so on. So just one example here is a close-up of some what are called echinocytes, which are red blood cells that have altered their morphology due to stress. And then we also had a smaller display of what we called science snapshots, which were also grouped into different themes such as light, water, fauna and flora, and so on. So in addition to the actual exhibit, we also had the option for people to browse through a PowerPoint display, so people who perhaps didn't want to spend too much time on their feet. And we also had booklets of the different themes online, which are still available for you to look at as well. So over the festival, we had 267 visitors, most of which were over the weekend. And we were quite pleased with the amount of time that people spent at the exhibit, with many spending more than 20 minutes, some even more than half an hour. And we had very few people that just sort of popped in and out in less than 5 minutes. Our feedback was overall quite positive, or very positive, with some constructive criticism for next time. And this included appreciation for things that they learned through the exhibit, appreciation for showing beauty in natural world and science, and appreciation for bringing science into the art space and encouraging us to continue and to put together a new exhibit in the future. So please, take some time to browse through the visual presentation that is online. And if you'd like to see the full exhibit, the virtual booklets are still available on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. If you could stop sharing your screen, that would be great. And while Joanne is working out how to stop sharing her screen, I will answer one of the questions in the Q&A. You can get onto the conference platform and see all these presentations. And you can also ask questions of the speakers online. And you can do that from now right through until a month after the conference. So please get on screen. And I would remind you all to don't forget to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen there to ask questions and to have a dialogue with our presenters today. I'd like to move on now to Portugal and Jan Swizerkowski, who's from the Universidade Católica Portuguesa. I'm not sure if I've actually said that correctly.
I think it's absolutely amazing.
But Jan, welcome, and Jan's going to be speaking about the art and science of the invisible, translating through metaphors. Thank you very much, Jan.
Thank you so much, and let me share my presentation, and please let me know if you can see the presentation. It's up. Great. Yes, exactly. I will be talking about the art and science of the invisible. Since we have very little time, let's go and talk about what is the art and science of the invisible. It's all art which is considered with particle physics, quantum physics, astrophysics, and all the elements of the invisible world that we cannot interact with our senses, but we have to derive them from complex mathematical transformations. And I'm pretty sure most of you have no idea what this is, but if we would show this image, then most probably all of you recognize the hydrogen atom. But the problem is that it's not so easy, because an atom is basically more like a cat, which is dead and alive at the same time, rather than a planetary system. And the invisible world is full of examples like this, because the visual imagery of quantum physics is out of this world. It doesn't come from our experience, but is embedded in the equations. So equations come before our visual imagery. And we have to translate this imagery to, and the equations to images. And to do this, we've started the Institute B61 in 2009. This is an interdisciplinary group of artists, scientists, designers, and performers who work in order to translate the invisible world. We've based our work on cognitive sciences and on the way that humans imagine things out of this world, like, for example, the lion man. The lion man is one of the first elements that we know which is out of this world. It is not a lion, it is not a man, it is a lion man. It has features of both, and our minds are able to conceptualize a thing like this according to a certain methodology, and we analyze this according to what is called conceptual blending. And we have adopted this conceptual blending theory into our research, and we are creating art and science translations of the invisible world, and we are trying to create immersive experiences, which are the type of Schrödinger's cat, which I've shown you before. And not to go into too much detail, but we again work a lot with cognitive sciences, because one thing is to blend, but the other thing is to make meaning. And in different cultures, we are making meaning out of the invisible world differently. So we will understand the invisible world differently, for example, in Portugal than in India. This is here our scheme of how we translated a main sequence star with artists into an immersive experience that looks more or less like this. This is the core of a star that was translated according to this methodology. And Institute B61 has been creating immersive performances, pop-up exhibitions, large-scale performances based on such translations. The biggest endeavor that we've done was the Cosmic Underground, financed by the European Commission, which was an exhibition about general theory of relativity, which connected European capitals of cultures from Tallinn to Guimarães. And for 2 months, more than 40 artists and scientists traveled on such a train and introduced the general theory of relativity to people on train stations. Another one was the evolution of the stars in Panjim in Goa. Here you can see men crossing the event horizon at the end of the performance. Just recently, this methodology was awarded with the USPTO patent for implementations in science centers. Yeah, I'm about to, yeah, and just as for the results, there have been more than 100 this type of immersive experiences that we've managed to show in a variety of countries. And just very briefly, I will give you one review that we've received from Forbes from our immersive performance in the Azores last year. Forbes basically wrote that the experience is euphoric and mind-bending with a touch of Clockwork Orange. Then Clash magazine wrote that it was a surreal, unusual work of creative genius and so on. But I'm not quoting this to brag. I just want to show you the last slide where this is explained, why people react so euphorically about this. Because when we blend two spaces, the scientific and the artistic one, we intend a certain translation, but around this translation, this is so strange, like the Schrödinger's cat, that there are so many different elements that our mind is puzzled with and tries to make sense of, that according to neuroaesthetics theories.
Jan, we're going to have to finish it there.
Yeah. So let's finish there. This is how art is being done. And this
if you can stop sharing your screen, thanks, Jan. I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and I feel like we could listen to you all session, but people will be able to explore this in more detail on the PCST platform. And I would like to now turn to our last speaker, Francisca Weeder from the University of Queensland in Australia, who's going to talk about final trashtination or hash final trashtination. Thank you, Francisca.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and it's a delight to be with you. And thanks for having me in this beautiful panel, and I'm really excited about that. And we already heard so many interesting things. Just a few thoughts from my side. So the situation I was in 2 years ago was I wasn't in Australia, I was in Austria. I was teaching and researching at a fairly small university with about 8,000 students. I was teaching public relations and strategic communication, where everything is about creating a message and then sending it to certain people, which we are pretty familiar with, like in science communication. And I'm a critical PR researcher, and I'm working a lot with Tamara Milstein on culture jamming and eco-culture jamming, and this is what we then started to do. So I was kind of stepping on my students' toes and made those PR students to not create a message, but create an art installation and create a communication space for conversations, and actually inspiring people to create their own meaning, their own sense on trash, and like create more awareness on the necessity of recycling. So what we did was basically we collected, we wanted to make the waste that was collected on our campus, we wanted to make this waste visible, because most of the time waste is kind of gone as soon as we put it in the bin.
Francisca, you're frozen. You might just turn your video off, and then we might be able to hear you.
Okay, I would just, is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So it's not a video anyway. The video is online on the platform, but just to share two or three pictures with you. So what we did is we collected all the waste that was, all the plastic and recycling waste that was collected at our university within 2 weeks' time. And we, as you can see, spread it out in front of the university. And as soon as you entered the university, we had those kind of wall pieces, those transparent pieces, which were open on the top. So we basically invited everyone who entered the university to pick at least one piece of trash, one plastic bottle, and then throw it in one of those kind of wall pieces. And by that, over the day, and sharing it via social media and sparking those conversations on what is kind of what people started to think about. We created this art piece which stayed at the university for 3 months, and it was basically a visual kind of crack in the normal patterns of someone who would have entered the university. Everyone was kind of stopped by these walls of plastic waste, and therefore the students made this beautiful experience of actually just by asking people to take one piece of plastic and throw it in those walls and kind of interactively doing something that you wouldn't do normally with the plastic waste. They created these cracks in those patterns or in our normal kind of practices. And that was a big learning for the students and a beautiful experience, and actually a pretty well kind of communicated art piece in the media and on social media, and of course within the university.
Thank you very much, Francisca. And for those who are wanting to see more about this, Francisca's loaded up a 3-minute video to the conference platform site, which has some great vision of this all happening. So I would encourage you all to go to the conference website and interact with each of these, as Marini Aubert put it on the Q&A, inspiring talks. Thank you so much. Joanne, if you could turn on your video screen, if that's okay. We've now got about 15 minutes available for question time. And I'm going to particularly look at some of the generic aspects of the questions rather than specific aspects. So one of the questions that Nancy Longnecker asked Mandy, but I think it's relevant to all of you, is how do you identify artists in the collaboration, and how do you get art involved in science? Mandy, maybe you can start answering that, and then if anyone else has got a question, they could also, an answer to that, they could also chime in. So Mandy?
Yes, sure. So look, it's an interesting question. And in my case, it was actually the artists who had that deep environmental commitment, and they actually came to us. So it was actually the other way around. But I think in a general sense, I think it comes from those conversations that often you have in the least likely places. So it's a matter of keeping an eye out for like-minded people who are open to weird and wonderful ideas. And then we did a lot of talking. So we did a lot of talking and spread the message through to get that information back to then build on the project. So it was a huge project that had lots of collaboration. But I think that in other art science collaborations that I've done, it has been a bit of a process, finding a few like-minded people, they know people, and so it's a bit organic, I guess. I don't know what other people have found.
Okay, does anyone else like to comment on that? Just put your hand up so I can see you, and I'll select you. Anyone else have a comment on that collaboration and how you get that going? Anyone?
I guess there's one other thing I'd say, and that is we also worked with Indigenous people, and I think that's increasingly we do that because there's very much a parallel in southwestern Australia between Noongar understanding and Western science. So I think if ever you have that opportunity, that is also worth exploring, working with your local Indigenous people. There's some great art collaborations that you can do through that.
Okay. Did anyone have a comment they wanted to make on that about collaboration, getting people together?
Can I make a quick comment on that?
Yes, Francisca.
I think this is the beauty of like probably what I experienced in this project. We started with like a very small group of people, and none of us were probably framed ourselves as artists, but then kind of being in this beautiful kind of creative process of like how make something visible, how to really do something just the other way around, and to create those cracks in like social practices, and this and create, by the end of the day, it was an art piece, and it was there for like a couple of weeks, and everyone perceived it as an art piece, and the media wrote about it as an art piece, and my students were just like so thrilled and excited because they thought like, oh my God, like what they learned in university is put together some data and communicate it in a beautiful message and blah 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 and all that, and now they really like, I think this is great to create communication spaces where people become a communicator or become an artist, or like a communicator role that might be different.
Great. I'm going to go to a question to Jan from Emma Whitecamp, which is also potentially relevant to some of the others of you as well. And Emma asks, have you explored whether you attract a different audience for these works that would be expected for science engagement activities more generally? In other words, are you able to engage the disinterested or the unengaged in science by using these artworks? Jan.
Yep. So I don't, well, we haven't done comparative studies to compare what is the public that would normally be interested in quantum physics. We just made assumptions. But basically, I believe, yes, we've done a lot of surveys during the Cosmic Underground across Europe, and we've done a lot of surveys in India. And basically, the range is huge, and especially with young people, which normally you wouldn't expect too much of interest into quantum physics or astrophysics. And this is also because we are trying to make it as fun as possible, and at the same time keeping it methodologically correct and philosophically, ontologically correct, which basically opens a lot of new creative ways that you can make meaning out of the surrounding reality. So I would say yes, because people have a lot of fun. It is as immersive as possible, and yeah. So yeah, we basically attract everyone, and I don't think this is what we could say of quantum physics or astrophysics.
What about any of the rest of you? Any being able to engage the disengaged or the uninterested in science? Yes, Autumn.
So I should have mentioned this during my presentation, but all of this is embedded within Science Gallery Dublin, and they're a PhD researcher in residence. And so all of our gallery exhibitions programs are aimed at people from the ages of 15 to 25, which is kind of a notoriously difficult age range. People are just too cool for school. And so we try to make sure that the stuff that we're sending out is really inviting participation, and that we are acting as kind of provocateurs. We're asking difficult questions, but we're creating the space for people to actually meaningfully contribute and have a conversation with a scientist, an engineer, an artist, and actually see that impact within the space of Science Gallery. And so I think we see a deeper, longer term engagement when we show consistently that their contributions, their ideas, their values that they share with us are meaningful to us too, and that we want to establish that longer term connection, and showing that their impacts are long lasting, so that we can kind of consistently engage with that audience, and as they age, they come back.
Great, Mandy, you also had a comment you wanted to make. Well,
I was just going to add to what Autumn was saying. We found the same, that our audience was a younger audience. We were getting those 20, 25, 30-year-olds coming along. And in the second iteration, we did add an on-ground component called Ground Beneath Our Feet, which was something where people could actually take action themselves and be involved in the project. And I think that was part of the reason why we doubled the audience, because there was that opportunity to be more engaged in the work and then have their story told as part of the whole exhibition. I think that is something that art science can do. It can engage younger audience and an audience who might not otherwise be engaged. Yeah.
Anyone else had a comment on that, engaging the people that you don't normally engage with this? Yes, Alice.
Just one thing I would add, in some of the teachers' workshops or schools workshops that we've run too, it's interesting to see that some folks are much more confident in exploring the science questions, making measurements, and more reluctant to pick up a pencil and to try and start drawing. So thinking about how, I think maybe we sometimes think about, you know, art as a tool for engaging folks with science, but sometimes science can be a tool for engaging folks who might not usually or engage with art. So maybe it works in both ways.
Great. Nancy asked a question of Joanne about visitor holding for the exhibition that you held. And could you tell a little bit more about the publicity beforehand and how you organised the curation of the exhibition? Did you have to turn away entries? And again, that might be interesting for others to respond to as well. So Joanne.
Sure. So publicity, we had posters up around town, but if you've ever been to the arts festival, and maybe other arts festivals are the same, every flat surface has a poster, so you are competing with many other posters. But I think our biggest thing was we had an advert in the arts festival guide, and fortunately we were placed right opposite the map, so we had a nice exposure there. And in terms of turning away entries, so we didn't take entries for the exhibition. We used photos from previous rounds of the competition. So we had, as I said, 10 rounds of photos that had been submitted previously to the competition, which we then had a team of people select from and put together themes. Yeah.
Thanks, Joanne. Not sure if anyone else had a comment on that, but I've just seen a really nice question from Virginia Coda, which is a general question and not directed at anyone. She says, congratulations on the presentations. But from the experiences you've had, do you think the public still receives with a certain strangeness and a certain surprise the combination of art and science? I think this might be our last question, and maybe we'll take a quick answer from all of you on whether there's a strange reaction to art and science. So I'm going to start with you, Autumn. Is there a reaction of strangeness to art and science?
I think people are getting a lot more used to it. And I think the strength of the art science approach is that it can be culturally responsive. And to go bounce off of Alice's great comment about art introducing science and science introducing art, I think that's absolutely true. It introduces us to different ways of thinking, of knowing, of being, and of problem solving too, and gets us more in that flexible mindset of cross-disciplinary collaborations. So I think people are ready for that kind of messy, entangled thinking.
I love that messy, entangled thinking. Joanne, the strangeness of art and science.
No, and I think it's in our experiences that it wasn't, our science exhibit certainly wasn't out of place in an art space. And I think the visitors are appreciative of the creativity in science as well. And you know, we are going to continue in this space. We've got a poetry book we've just developed that we're now going to also put something together for this year's arts festival. So there's definitely an appreciation of the creativity of science and also the creativity in scientists in the art space.
Joe.
Ooh, this is difficult because my work isn't really public facing, but just to pick up on Alice's point about how hard it is to pick up a pencil, I definitely have found that with the scientists that I've worked with in terms of helping them think more reflexively about their public engagement. But when they do, what it does do is removes them from their normal mindset and means that we're all contributing kind of in a very level way. We're all equally bad at drawing, or for that matter, making cardboard prototypes or modeling with clay, and it is a really useful leveler. So creativity can do that thing of helping us kind of cross those boundaries.
Thanks, Joe. Francine.
Yes, I'm of course more concerned with the interplay between the conservators and the art. I'm not working with artists per se, but with people who conserve the art that has been made a long time ago. But I have noticed that usually when I say I'm a mathematician, people are really like ooh, that's hard, and I'm never gonna understand what you're doing, and never mind, don't talk about it. But then I say, like, wait, I'm working with a museum, please listen. And actually then it turns out that this combination of telling them how mathematics can be used within a museum project and actually to discover very interesting things about museum objects that really grabs the attention. And that's also why I really love this project, because people then are not as scared of mathematics anymore.
Great. Francisca.
It's a very interesting point. My main thought at the moment is that science thinks a lot like in time and related to what people do. But I think bringing communication in offers us the beautiful opportunity to create space for meaning and sense-making processes. And I do like to stimulate more thinking that art is not a channel to communicate about certain bits and pieces of science or facts or figures, but it is much more as a representation of what we think and and it facilitates all these kind of thinking processes. So even if this is like a bit more general and philosophical, but I think it's a good idea to really think about art not only as a channel to communicate stuff, but go much further.
Great. Mandy.
Yes, well, I suppose thinking back, really art has been part of science for hundreds of years. People have drawn botanical drawings of animals and plants. They've done, you know, Da Vinci did drawings linked to his thought, and so I suppose it's almost a rediscovery in a way of those links between the art and creativity and science. And I think because there's a whole conversation about STEM and STEAM, and it's certainly in Australia, that's very much a part of the education system now. I think people are becoming more used to it, and it's just so great to see all these other outlandish artistic endeavours being woven into science. And I think science communicators are very, very good at doing that and getting better. So,
Jan.
Yeah, so I think I will pick up where Francisca ended, saying that, well, it depends on what you mean by art and science. And for sure, there's no strangeness if, and a lot of people think of art and science as a way to channel your thoughts and communicate your science, then no, there's no strangeness to this anymore. But if you define art and science as a separate genre of art and separate genre from science or science communication, then yes, there's a lot of, and there's no acceptance that art and science is actually a separate discipline and has its own methodology and so on. Yeah.
Stefanie.
I just see, you know, you need creativity for both science as well art. So that's where I see this. My experience is that the public is really embracing it and really loving it. I think it's more around us as researchers actually discovering different kind of ways how we can actually communicate. So point taken by this, it's not only about art being a channel for communicating research. That's definitely not the case.
And lucky last, Alice.
So Stefanie sort of took the words out of my mouth. I think from my perception, it's not the public who think it's strange. I think it's the silos that we create in our institutions that we think about it as being strange. Speaking from a university perspective, I know there's many others here. So we think of it as something, you know, new or interesting, or breaking down some silo that perhaps doesn't exist in the general consciousness in the way that it does in the places that some of us work.
What a fabulous first session for PCST2020+1 with 9 fabulous presentations. Well done, everyone. And I would remind you that there's 8 more visual presentations to take place. I've just remembered I have to do the polling. So I'm going to launch the poll. It's anonymous. So if you can just vote for who you think was the best presentation out of those 9. I almost forgot to do it, but I'd really appreciate for those if you could do that. I'll put it on for a minute or more. A reminder that the PCST platform has all these visuals on there. You can continue the dialogue that's happening there. Please do so. Really look forward to you participating in this and continuing this dialogue that's happened. So thank you. And I've heard lots of congratulations. I think it's going to be hard to decide who's going to do that. I'll give you 15 more seconds to vote if you haven't already, and then I'll close it off. But thanks once again to all of our presenters today. You'll be able to view this presentation back again as well on the PCST platform once I get it and load it up, and as well all the other presentations that are being held during this virtual conference. Congratulations everyone for being the first presenters in our virtual conference. Well done, and I'm ending the poll. And thank you everyone. So bye, and hopefully we'll see you at the next visual session, which is happening tomorrow, 3 hours later, to suit all the different time zones. And that'll be chaired by my colleague, Jan Rees. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Jenny, bye.
Thanks.